Women were among some of the early converts to Islam. Many of them converted even against the wishes of their families, without their families, independent, even as young women. When Muhammad and his followers make the emigration from Mecca to Medina, which was no small feat, traveling 200 miles or so across the desert, many of these women went with him. Right? They made this journey in defiance of their families. Even later, many women, even after that major migration, when some women who became Muslim in Mecca wanted to get away, they would sneak off on their own and make their way to Mecca. So they played very heroic roles in many ways in the early Islamic community. Women participated in the pact that Muhammad originally made with the inhabitants of Medina when he meets with them. I'm not sure if I missed his lecture. I'm not sure if he talked to you about this, Professor Blankenship. But before Muhammad goes to Medina, he meets with a group of representatives from Medina that included some women, and they also participate in this negotiation and this pact treaty that's not really a treaty, but this pact that's made that precedes Muhammad being able to go to Medina. During Muhammad's life in Medina, women seem to have been very much part of the community. There are many stories that are told in the sources about individual women coming up to the Prophet Muhammad as he sat in the mosque, walking right through the lines of men, walking straight up to Muhammad, addressing him directly, asking him questions, sometimes very pointed questions, and so on. At one point, some of the women complained. I think it's an interesting commentary on women's work. Some of the women complained to the Prophet Muhammad that they had so much continuous work to do, sort of domestic work, that there was never time for them to come to the mosque and sit and listen to him give religious teachings or teach the Quran. And so Muhammad set aside a certain time every week when all of the women in the community were supposed to come to the mosque, and he would teach just them specifically. Right? So we have this sense that women are very much active members in their own right of this early Muslim community, and they have participated as well to some extent in some of the early battles. Mostly in a support role, taking care of the wounded and carrying water and so on. But there is at least one example from the Battle of Uhud, which was a battle that Muslims lost to the Meccans. And in this battle, Muhammad was wounded. Not seriously, but he was wounded. And it is said that there was a woman who was there in a support capacity, but she brought a dagger anyway. And for a while, she stood around the Prophet defending him while he was down and wounded from other people who may have been trying to attack him. Right? So we have all of these examples that the sources record in the early history about women's participation. This participation, I should say, continues for several generations after the time of the Prophet, and it decreases, at least in terms of what's recorded. May not have actually decreased, but in terms of what's recorded, it decreases, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But I want to also talk about what the Quran says about women. So for this, you might need your handout there. When you read the Quran, if you were to read through these passages that I gave you, you might find some that make very clear statements about the equality of men and women, particularly spiritual equality or moral equality of men and women, and others that seem to clearly establish a hierarchy or at least a difference of roles between men and women. And that's undoubtedly the case if you read the Quranic texts about women. But the Quran does make a very strong statement in several ways about the spiritual equality of men and women. For example, when it addresses human beings or addresses the human being as such, it usually uses a gender-neutral word like insan or nas, which is the plural, which means human being in, again, as I said, a gender-neutral way.